Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me? Thumbs up? Yes. Okay. Welcome to this conversation and interview and battle of ideas with myself and Connor. Just in case you don't know who I am, my name's Tiago. I teach an online course called Building a Second Brain, where I teach people note-taking and knowledge management. And Connor, if you're here under a different name, let me know because I don't see your name. But Connor is the founder of a note-taking tool for networked thought called Rome, and the company is called Rome Research. And oh, there you are. Cool. So I'm having some issues with the new operating system on Mac and Zoom where sometimes I have to shut down my entire computer. So I'm going to make you a co-host, Connor. So if I disappear, that's probably what happened, and you'll be alone I'll let you manage it for a few minutes.
Great. Can everybody hear me, or is my mic not working?
Yeah, it's good.
Good, great, awesome.
And I can see people from all over here: Santa Barbara, Berkeley, UK, India, Sofia, Bulgaria, Lisbon, Portugal, Spokane. Great mix of Amsterdam, NYC, Quebec. So thank you all for coming.
Woo!
We had a ton of interest in us talking, actually.
It's about time.
I know, it's about time. It's about time. So let's see here. Oh, quick Zoom orientation. There's a chat in case you haven't found it yet. If you click the chat button in the Zoom toolbar, you'll see a window pop up, and I encourage you to be active in the chat. Sometimes you'll have questions you want answered. I'll check in there once in a while, both of us will. If there's anything you want us to talk more about or less about, or you want, links to references that we mention, all that kind of thing can happen in the chat. And when I send out the recording to everyone who registered, I'll send a transcript of the chat as well. So you don't need to ask like, what was that thing again? Or, search through the chat or anything. Connor, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Where are we? So let me see if I can find this Zoom. So yeah, I am the founder of Rome Research, which is a far better second brain than Evernote. I've known Tiago for years, and I'm exceptionally grateful for the many ways that you've been wrong on Twitter, because it has prompted some of my best writing. And that writing has led to a lot of the early adopters who've come in and started using Rome. But yeah, I've been working on tools for thought and collective intelligence for about 10 years. I started doing startups back in around 2009, working on a tool to sort of crowdsource better ways for people to improve their local governments. That was a company called Localocracy. And then we ended up getting acquired by AOL, where I led an R&D group focused on like creating debates and user-generated content and better ways to sort of crowdsource ideas from the sort of massive user base we had. And that convinced me that the sort of fundamental structure of the internet of like links between pages and the whole like concept of pages as the main unit for organizing knowledge was wrong. And so basically since about 2013, I've been working on a better way of organizing information, first for the like personal use case of just representing the structure of your mind and how you think ideas are connected, but with our long-term goal being able to augment collective intelligence and increase the pace at which people can get theoretical and practical knowledge. That's the TLDR on me.
Cool. And can you put a link to your website or your blog in the chat for anyone who has?
Sure. I've got my notes on for this call. Actually, I've been using our public help database, which is also where I do some of my like public writing on knowledge management, and it includes a bunch of Tiago's free content copy pasted in and a few other resources. I have to close down all my other things, but I'll link to our help database right here. That's fine. Hold on, let me turn off the alarm on my phone.
Yeah, good idea. Cool. Well, if there's any questions right off the bat, as Connor gets that ready, Uh, Go ahead and start putting them in the chat. I'll start kind of organizing them and sequencing them.
Shit.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm meeting everyone. Let us know. So let me tell you
Hey, Fred.
let me tell you the plan here. We're going to start with the big picture. I really want to know. I think this audience is probably way on the techie, intellectual, nerdy side. You guys probably want to know like some of the principles behind the product, kind of the insights that led to it. So I want to start there, and then towards the end, we'll go more towards demos.
Cool.
And have Connor show us the ins and outs of how it works. So once again, I'm going to mute everyone, and then I'll unmute you, Connor. But yeah, let's get right into it. So let's really start. Why did Rome need to exist? This is really what I want to know. What was sort of the founding insight, or like the thing, maybe it was a life experience or professional experience that made you dedicate what is already years and probably will be many years more of your life? Like, what was the spark?
I think a big part of it was, so hold on, I'm closing down all my other tabs, so I just have so I can just have Rome open for you. So one of my favorite books is this book by Mortimer Adler called How to Read a Book. He sort of talks about, if you want to, understand something, you pre-read the book, you skim it, and then you look through it to sort of pull out the structure of the arguments that are being made, what kind of questions the author is trying to answer. And if you really want to understand a field, you read a bunch of books in that subject and you bring those authors into conversation with one another. And for me, this seemed like a great starting point for being able to have like intelligent discourse on the internet, right? Like there's all sorts of places where, this sort of a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants on. Or like people are making complicated arguments, but then they're just getting responses with ad hominem attacks. And so the problem that I've always been interested in is like, how can we figure out what's actually like true online, or what arguments at least are well structured and like, logically coherent based on the, if I share a bunch of axioms with you about like what our goals are for productivity, right? Like I can see, okay, goals from that, maybe you've got some axiom that I disagree with, but like some other things might hold together. So I started thinking that if we want to build a like knowledge management system that can like help people organize ideas and organize, even paths through learning a complex field, you should start with a single player tool. And the first sort of use case should be, I should be able to take these like 6 authors who've written 6 different books, and I should be able to map their ideas together cohesively. And I should be able to trace that back to the source, so that if somebody thinks that I misquoted an author or I didn't really understand their core, what they meant in that, like that claim that they were making, my like summary of them should be able to link back directly to the source of the text. So that's sort of where, so I'd used a bunch of other tools, and I'm a big fan of Paul Graham's work, and I like this idea of doing things that don't scale. So during my, I took sort of a brief research sabbatical after I left AOL, and I would get a bunch of people together to try and organize, once a week, we would each read a chapter in a book, or we'd each read like an academic paper, and we'd summarize it for one another, and we tried to build this map. And we tried doing this with tools like Workflowy or Evernote, and just the mapping was completely impossible, right? The ability for even me as an individual to sort of take these ideas that I had from a bunch of different places and sort of gradually build up a coherent whole out of those small components, just like didn't fit with the structure of, existing file like tools where the sort of map is, you've got files and folders, and when you have an idea, you have to decide what file it should be in, and if it needs to be in, in a different kind of hierarchy, then you need to copy and paste and have the same content in multiple places, and there's no real way to track how ideas are related across these documents. So that sort of was like the sort of, founding principles. I think that the relationship that we have any in our minds, like, the book that I was recommended, that, if Tiago recommends me a book that I read on my summer vacation, like my notes about that might, relate to my summer vacation, or they might relate to Tiago, like, but if I put that all just in a file for that particular book, especially if that book relates to 6 different topics, it's hard for me to see all the sort of multi-dimensional relationships that has naturally in my mind. So that's I think a bit of where we started from is this desire to be able to create these sort of overarching syntheses of a bunch of different ideas and to organize ideas before you know what the structure of them is.
Very
cool. I'm trying to turn off my...
That kind of relates to one of the questions here, which is how do you give people that big picture view as you're creating links in this network? How do you, someone wrote here, how can I see that something that I'm building towards? How did you approach that problem?
So, well, I mean, it might be even easier for me to just like jump into some of the demo earlier. But basically, like at the end, we're used to presenting ideas in a linear format, right? When I talk to you, you know, there's a sequence in which you're going to ask questions. Like people can only hear the stream of my thoughts. So, and when we present ideas to other people, often the best way to do that is in this linear format of, you know, a presentation or a written document, some sort of like piece of prose. Like, I don't think that like exploring graph visualizations of ideas is necessarily the best way to introduce somebody to a new concept. Like prose is incredibly powerful. Like it's nice to be able to guide somebody through a sequence and just sort of introduce the ideas one at a time. But that's not useful when you're trying to figure out what you're going to say in the first place, right? If you're trying to write your thesis and you don't yet know what your thesis is about, you're just, you know that these 6 ideas are really important and, you know, they're connected in a bunch of ways, but you haven't yet figured out the structure of how all these pieces relate. You need to be able to, you know, to first collect all the things and group them into overlapping sets and say like, okay, these 3 things are related. I don't quite know how they're related yet, but here's a collection. These 3 things are related, or these 50 things are related, and there's a bunch of subsets in there. So first you want to be able to have these buckets of like overlapping collections, and then you want to be able to sort of say, okay, this relates to this relates to that, and then when it comes time to actually make your presentation, then you can gradually sort of fit those intermediate packets or like intermediate deliverables, to use the building a second brain language, into a coherent presentation that you're eventually going to, you know, might be a tweet storm, or it might be a blog post or a YouTube video or something like this.
You had an early like a group of users that were scientists, right?
Yeah.
Was that intentional or on accident, and how did that influence things?
Yeah, so I am a big fan of, you know, this idea that you want to build something people want, and you want to know for sure that they want it. And Rome, in the beginning, we knew we were going to be building sort of a like a Photoshop for you know, for knowledge work. So something that like was a tool that you might need to learn how to use. Like in the early days, we knew that like it wasn't going to be something that's going to be intuitive, right? There might be some weird syntax stuff. And so we wanted to focus with basically high expectation customers, people who already knew that their knowledge management systems were completely failing them in terms of having better ideas, or like, you know, their end output was like blog posts or academic papers. And so we started with actually the AI safety research community, partially because of its adjacency to Less Wrong and the rationalist community, where, you know, you've got a lot of people who are thinking about thinking already. Did I already lose Tiago? No, there's just somebody else who's come up. And so we started basically with where we could get paying customers that were going to try the tool really early and be willing to give a ton of feedback on it. And that was useful from us from the perspective of validating the market for this thing, because, you know, we're sort of taking the Tesla approach of like going after the people who like want the thing bad enough that they'll pay an exorbitant amount of money for it. And that was useful for us for validating the product to investors before we had massive adoption.
Totally.
And so that's how we like ran the company for about a year and a half, before we just launched our beta. We started accepting like, you know, invites still within that research community, but from a broader pool than our initial early adopters in August. And then we opened up the beta completely in October, and it's been a pretty crazy, like, you know, 20% plus week over week growth for the last 20 weeks. So it's been pretty, we've got the hockey stick now, which has been pretty nice. So
amazing.
Yeah.
What kind of people then, now that you've opened it up a bit, what are the most typical profiles of people you see, personal or professional?
Yeah, so I think there's a good Venkatesh Rao had a great thread about Rome, which is probably how a bunch of people who are on this call might have heard about it.
If someone has a link to
And
that, if you could drop it in the chat, that would be nice.
I can pull up a link pretty quickly. It's right here. Let me just. Here's the source.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why I'm here. Basically, Venkatesh Rao is a friend and mentor of mine. He really kind of got me started on this whole internet thought leadery thing that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And hosted some of my first writing on his blog. And I listened to him because
He's been a huge, that's, we're like the what's the Ishmael and Isaac of Venkatesh Rao. I think, he's been a pretty big influence for both of us, but we've taken it in different directions. So.
Yeah, but he's also, I think the reason I listened to him is he's such a skeptic. He's kind of a curmudgeon. He really, like if Venkatesh says, that's good, that's like a huge compliment. He does not give compliments lightly. So
when my co-founder, it was over Thanksgiving break when Venkat started tweeting about Rome, and my co-founder sent me a link to the thread, and I was immediately like, oh fuck, like because one of his like third tweets is like, what the fuck is coast layout, like, and I was like, oh shit, I hope like, so I was very pleasantly surprised that he has gravitated to the product as much as he had.
But you were going to say what kind of people you see coming on board.
Yeah, so I think his analogy of foxes and hedgehogs is pretty good. So a hedgehog is somebody who has a sort of an overarching worldview, and everything that they're observing is coming in through that lens. So you could think about that as somebody who has a really strict model for how they're going to do information organization. They like already know what all their categories are. They already know, like basically what the taxonomy is of anything that they can imagine seeing. And so when they see it, they just fit it into that bucket. Whereas a fox is making a bunch of discrete observations, and they don't yet have, one coherent overarching worldview. They're just sort of taking these discrete observations and seeing how do they fit together, and they're letting that any kind of overarching organization work. So you're starting from like small building blocks, and then just sort of like thinking about it more like, how do these atoms become molecules, and how do these molecules then maybe become like cells inside an organism, and you watch the set of ideas evolve. So I think there's two main like people we've seen become like super active power users. So one are the folks, and people use it for a bunch of different things. Some people use it as like a GTD system for just like task management, for like managing all of their commitments and all the things they need to do. And when I like give the demo, I can show like you can have your to-dos that relate to Home Depot, and then when you click Home Depot, you can see all the things that you have to do there, which is pretty like David Allen-esque. Or like some of the Home Depot things you might be able to buy from Amazon, so they can be in your Amazon list. And if you decide to go to Amazon before Home Depot, you can check them off, and then they won't appear when you're at Home Depot. So there's some folks who use it for that, but a lot of people use it for idea organization. And so you have folks like bloggers and writers who are, or even one of the more interesting use cases was from a Stanford MBA who showed me he was, whenever he was reading articles about sand, he was like really interested in sand in China, and how like China's running out of sand and they need sand to make concrete, and it's like there's going to be a huge market for sand. And so he's developing this macroeconomic thesis, and every article that he's reading about sand, he's just copy pasting into Rome, and he's got this like metadata that he's including in terms of indentation, so he can like build up his model of sand, so that when he needs to convince a hedge fund to give him a job, he's like got his resources all there for constructing this argument. But then you also see bloggers who are just they've got all their resources, and maybe like an article they're reading or a quote they're reading could relate to like 3 potential blog posts that they're writing. So they're like collecting these intermediate packets, or these quotes that they think are going to be building blocks for their future argument. And some of those quotes might be quotes some of them might be things that they've gotten from other people, but they're building up this way of helping them get the pieces, so that when it comes time for them to write whatever blog post is on their mind, they're not starting with a blank page.
Totally.
On the flip side of that, we also have a lot of startup founders and product managers. We've got product managers at Google. We've got folks at Facebook, at OpenAI, at DeepMind, at Dropbox, like all the big tech companies we have, and a bunch of founder level folks. So like the founders of Gatsby.js are pretty loud about how Roam is better than Notion. And so they're using it for things like, how do I take my individual, deliverables that I have coming up and map those into a cohesive roadmap, right? So we know we have all these things we have to do, but we don't know ahead of time what our roadmap is going to be. Like, how do we like take these small blocks and then build them together to like figure out, okay, like this thing should happen before this and this should happen before that. So yeah, like writers and like product people are too, but then, we also see people using it as a spaced repetition system, and people using it for like, taking notes on their classes and then using those notes in their classes to go ahead and write their final papers, right? So there's a pretty broad range of use cases, but they all kind of fit this hedgehog or this fox model, right?
Totally. What's the use case you're most excited for? Either present or future, like the one you're just like itching for?
I'm really interested in like people, like one of the things that's always been, I mean, right now it's just exciting that people are able to make intellectual progress on like otherwise, like otherwise non-tractable tractable problems. So people who are able to just like write a little bit faster and more quickly, like, pull these things out. But there are a bunch of folks who have been asking about publishing on Roam. So there are a few folks who've like made these like Roam blogs. And I do think that there's like our long-term goal has been, it's never been, we're just going to build a player notes tool. It's always been, I want to be able to release my knowledge graph to somebody else so that they can traverse it, and then they can take, my building blocks and remix it. So I'm really interested in, we've just gotten to the point where we've, raised a seed round. And so we're like growing the team. We're like, we've been 2 engineers for the last 2 years, and we're finally going to be starting to scale up. So I'm really interested in replacing Twitter as the place where these threads of threads are happening, and like where people can sort of explore this evergreen content as opposed to this like hyper current stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really interested in people using it for creating educational content, like people sort of like remixing other people's courses and figuring out like, more like even more specific paths that how do I remix this stuff from Tiago and this stuff from Brett Victor and like create a sort of path on building a thing with explorable explanations or some like niche thing like that. So I'm interested in the pedagogical content that can come out of people publishing on Roam, and also just people being able to like map out conspiracy theories. Like I think that's going to be really fun. Like I'm really interested in somebody like creating a whole like really detailed map of like flat Earth or like the Kennedy assassination of like, well, this is the structure of the argument, and this is all the evidence for this claim, and we can't go to Antarctica and visit it. I'm like really pumped to see like the conspiracy theorists like really flock to the tool. It's going to be really awesome. So yeah.
There's some really good questions here that kind of get into the nitty gritty a bit. Let's talk a little bit about trust and privacy. Why? What are you guys doing, or why should people trust you guys with all this personal data? What are you doing differently than the typical best practices and other companies?
I mean, so we follow the same sort of like data is encrypted at rest. It's encrypted over the so we follow like the standard best practices there. I think one of the places that's different is if you look at our privacy policy versus, for instance, like Notion's privacy policy. Like we're very clear that like your data belongs to you. Like we're not going to use it for advertising, or like we're not going to sell your data. We're not going to be like, monetizing your data or like scraping it or doing anything like that. So it is stored on our servers, and right now we don't fully have like end-to-end encryption yet. And I think the main reason that we don't have that yet is because if you lose your password and you have an end-to-end encrypted thing, you sort of lose all your data currently. And we've had a lot of people who've needed to reset their password. So I think for most people, they don't want that yet. We're interested in people being able to like, encrypt some subset and like create some passphrase that if they lose that, they lose it completely. But they can lock certain like very private notes down. But yeah, we use Google servers. So our backend is like hosted by Google. So it's the same kind of general security best practices that you get from leaning on existing infrastructure.
How do you think about personal versus public space? What's the principle there?
I think that it's really important to be able to have those freely mixed together. So right now, and I'll say that like in Rome, this is not yet the best like, workflow, right? So like this is just a place where, we've had a lot of features to build, and we've had, limited engineering resources so far. So we've only been able to roll things out sort of incrementally. So right now on Rome, you have two options. You can share a single page, and it'll strip all the backlinks. None of the links inside will be clickable, like if they're links to other Rome pages. So you can share a page just to like present an idea, and you can make that page like editable by other people. You can also make multiple databases of like Rome's power users who have, one Rome database for just their private notes, one Rome database for their blog, one Rome database for like them and their, romantic partner, one Rome database for like the company that they're working with. But our long-term goal is for you to be able to have like a granular sharing on the level of, a block, or on the level of a tag. So I can share, all of my Tiago notes with Tiago. And even if those notes are freely intermixed with my private notes, he won't be able to see my private notes, but he'll be able to see all the content that relates to him. So that's where and eventually we want to have people being able to subscribe across databases. So I can say like, give me a notification whenever, Tiago puts something in his list of like Memex resources, right? Anytime Tiago says something that like talks about Memexes, I want to like be notified of this, and then I want to be able to incorporate that note into my knowledge base somewhere.
Awesome. Kind of related to that, do you see Rome over time becoming more, there's a question here from Jacob, is it going to go more towards a personal productivity, personal knowledge management, or become more group oriented?
I mean, we see both use cases right now. So, I mean, our sort of, we're big fans of like Michael Nielsen, who wrote a great book called Reinventing Discovery. And in that, he talks about sort of network science as efficient allocation of expert attention, and the ability for people to have ad hoc collaborations. A lot of times like really good ideas, we sort of like buy into this idea of like, ideas don't emerge from nowhere, right? Sort of ideas are kind of constantly having sex with one another. And, if you've incorporated some idea or some mental model in, it's changing your perception of the world. And so then you're noticing new things, and they're getting filtered through that idea, and then they're going to turn into something new. So we're really interested in people being able to take ideas from across a bunch of different disciplines and remix those together to come up with new things. So I basically think that the information model that tools like Notion or Evernote have when it comes to collaboration, where they're pushing these like enterprise deals where the company is going to have a knowledge base, and the company's knowledge base is owned by the company, and you're working on somebody else's turf when you're like doing knowledge work for that company knowledge base. That's just not accurate for how people work. Like sometimes there are things where they're doing some stuff with the company, but a lot of times they're bringing in their expertise that they have from their past job, or they're bringing in conversations that they had with somebody who works at a different company, and they might want to collaborate with them on some open source thing, or some like conceptual model that applies to the whole field, some like industry best practice group. So we think that even when you have teams using Rome, it's a bunch of individuals who are knowledge and effective, like still like owned by those individuals.
Okay, there's some questions here that I think you've probably either answered or could easily answer in an FAQ, like about mobile, Rome blogs. Ed put here a link to the fox versus hedgehog kind of dichotomy, which is super, super simple and also valuable. So I encourage you guys to check that out. Let me see here. How about
I'll also just share some for folks who are curious, who are like digging along. I'm going to just throw a link to the to some of the. Here's our like public Rome, and I've just got a tag for Tiago debate here that includes some resources I tagged that I thought were relevant to our conversation.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna skip some of these that could easily be solved online, but I really want to get to the heart of this disagreement.
Yeah.
So because I think that despite our kind of corny marketing, there really is something like of substance there.
Yeah.
You think, and I don't know if you want to go Rome versus Notion, or you personally versus me, or Rome versus Evernote, like whatever of those matchups you think is most interesting. Let's talk about what the fundamental difference is there.
Well, there's a couple big differences. I was looking through our old tweets, and there's some things in there. One is this idea that you have of Jubilee, and of like burning your old notes. And I think that this is like really directly opposed to your idea of intermediate deliverables. And I think it shows something about the way that you take notes, that like you need to burn your notes in order for you to like have a cohesive organizational system. I like in general, I like a lot of the stuff you've said, particularly around intermediate packets and like workflows, right? Of like, like how do you make your schedule such that in short cycles, you're creating reusable chunks of knowledge. But I think that there's and I think a great example of this was, I was sort of sitting in the back, like semi-trolling when you invited me to your creative workshop. That was the thing that you and David Perel did. And I know that like, I was like demoing Rome to like the Evernote product manager in the back while you were like trying to give your course. So I appreciated your patience there. But there was something to the activity that you did where you cut up a bunch of David's quotes from his Evernote and you shuffled those on the table, and then you sort of said, okay, like take 6 of those notes and use those for like writing your blog posts, right? To me, this was like those were notes. Those weren't a thing that he had shipped, right? He had not shipped any of those things as part of his written material. They were just core components that he could remix into future knowledge, and they were useful for everybody in the room. They weren't their notes, they were David's notes, but they were still useful as like building blocks for a potential writing project. And so I sort of believe that I do believe that like if you have a knowledge management system that doesn't require you to know where everything is, right? If you don't have to have this strict taxonomy where when you have an idea, you need to like find the folder and like put it in that right file and make these decisions that are often like totally arbitrary about like, is this thing about Tesla or is this thing about environmentalism, right? Is this thing about, like climate change, or is this thing about nuclear fuel, right? If you don't have to make those distinctions, you don't have to like burn down your archives periodically in order to do that. And so I think that for me, there's a much more, and I see this as sort of a conflict in things you've said publicly, because I really think the intermediate packets is a super important concept and is one of the sort of best things that you've done like for the space is introducing that idea. But you seem to draw, or you were, at least when we were fighting on Twitter, this big distinction between stuff that you've published and stuff that is your notes. And I don't think that's true. I think that like every unit of knowledge that you're using could be generative for building something else up. And you should be building these remixable building blocks constantly. So that's one place where I think we disagree. Is there any,
so when I say like burn down or delete, it's really archiving. And that is an extreme, not extreme, but it's an important distinction between stuff that has not been used and stuff that has been used. For people, it seems like you can manage anything in Rome, but for people who are managing projects, is there no such distinction between projects in the future or that you're currently working on? Like, what do you do with something that's been actionable, but then that becomes unactionable in Rome?
Yeah, I mean, there's not like, so Rome is just pretty inspired by the Zettelkasten system, which was this system that was sort of really most fully realized by a German sociologist in the 50s and 60s, where he ended up, by the time he died, he had like, I think 60,000 or 100,000 index cards. Many of them had like a single quote on them. But the quotes, they all had a unique identifier, and they were all often referencing other quotes or other paragraphs. They were all basically intermediate packets that he'd created. And one of the interesting things about that system is that many of his cards, not a huge number, but many were indexes to the rest of his library. So if he had a like current projects, if he wanted to organize his current projects, then he'd just make one index card, which is like current projects as of December 12th, and he would index a bunch of the core ideas in that. And when December 12th passes, it sort of shifts everything is sort of naturally in the archive already, right? There might be one thing that he's, he's like starred and put in the Rome context. There might be something that he's like, put on his sidebar so that you can access it really regularly, or, he's put it in a note that he has started on his sidebar, which is like things I'm paying attention to right now. But it's much more gradual. There isn't really a clear distinction between things which are archived and things which aren't, because, I'll give a quick screen share. I'll just give this very quick example of like, when I was going through our debate, right? This is, these are some of the thoughts I had from today. These are some thoughts I had from yesterday, right? Where I was pulling in a few different things. And so they're all related to this, but like, as I was going through here, right? And I was looking at, I believe it was, underneath, like, I just started using this tag maker schedule, right? Because I was like pulling in a bunch of tweets from Venkat, right? And, I was like, Venkat's talking about this problem that Rome solved for him of not needing to have such a large lead up time in terms of doing intellectual work. And in the course of, tagging that tweet with maker schedule, it reminded me of this intermediate packets. And so I quickly sort of like just jumped back up into something that I'd created of yours that was technically in my archive, right? But your ideas of just-in-time project management. And, I started pulling in the quotes from that I thought related to maker schedule. And so those old things which I had been part of it'd been a resource that was useful for a post that I wrote like maybe 4 months ago, but then, immediately it started being like just by searching through that intermediate packets page, right? If I jump back here, right? I started finding these little bullets that you'd written that I thought were like pretty useful. And as I was reading those, I was like, oh yeah. But then the other thing that was interesting is like, while I was similarly doing this, I was also pulling in, Engelbart. And one of our other big beasts is you think that Doug Engelbart and Vannevar Bush, the particular claim made, I think, is actually kind of relevant, and we can go into this, which is that their work doesn't help with popularizing, knowledge management.
Oh yeah, work. That was how this all started.
But basically, like, as I was reading through this, I just decided to like make a key term out of, let me filter this thing down, out of concepts. And, then I clicked this key term for concepts, and it reminded me of, oh shit, I've got these like 35 unlinked references to concepts. Analogy in the Core of Cognition is like one of my favorite essays. It's by Douglas Hofstadter. And, I had forgotten that I'd placed this in my database, but then I was like, oh yeah, this idea of concepts like totally matches with this thing that Doug Engelbart is talking about in this paper. And so I just like saw this interesting connection because of these links. It's a little hard for people to like get that in a demo because I'm reading the text itself while I'm doing this kind of work. But
Connor, what's the best way if people want, I don't know, tutorials, demos, little videos to really learn this tool? What's the best resource for that?
So our help database is a cool thing for exploring. And at the bottom, once you create an account in Rome, there's like, this is sort of the quick like keyboard shortcuts. But down at the bottom, there's this link to help videos and help database. And so if you click help videos, there are a bunch of like short videos on like creating links, bidirectional links, unlinked references, tags, scheduling, filters, like all those kinds of things. But then you can also just like click this link to help database, and you'll be brought to this welcome to Rome page, which is a place where, we know we've got a lot of like, Rome is sort of like Excel. It's like, really powerful, but has a little bit of a learning curve still. So we're going to be working on better onboarding so that when people sign up, they get walked through in a very specific way. But the sort of folks who've really like gravitated to the tool often have just spent some time. And now the help database is a thing where it's a sandbox, like you can edit it, but your changes, unless you're on the core Roam team, are not going to be persisted. So you can go in and you can like click into stuff and see like, okay, like how does this markdown work? You know, like how do these like YouTube embeds work? This is actually a reference to another thing. So yeah, all those kind of things are ways that you can sort of, you know, you can take a look at like block embeds and block references and that kind of stuff.
There's a couple interesting comments here. And I do want to get to somewhere meaningful here. So first, a couple of notes. Zettelkasten was this really like the forefather, I think, along with the Memex.
Yep.
Of this whole, like, this just the very possibility of having a centralized knowledge management system.
Yep.
There's a book called, are you familiar with How to Take Smart Notes?
Yeah, that's Sanka's, yeah, he's not quite a friend, but we've talked a bunch.
So I long ago gave up reading any book on note taking because I had been disappointed so many times by how incredibly vapid and boring they tend to be. But I read this book recently. It's by far and away the best book on note taking I've ever read.
Yep.
It really is profound. I've spent probably 25 hours. I'm doing a summary and then an analysis and then a point by point sort of breakdown of how my ideas compare and contrast with his ideas. And what's so interesting is he both goes back and explains what Luhmann did with the Zettelkasten in a way that few others have done before, but then he updates it for the modern age, which I think is such a useful bridge. But George wrote here that maybe sort of the difference between us is kind of the difference between temporary notes and permanent notes.
Well, so we have, I mean, in Roam, I can show how our sort of slipbox system works, but like Roam is basically, unless you are deciding that something is a permanent note, right? Like in my Roam, I have a slipbox, and my slipbox is where I've hierarchically organized things. I have like created titles for those pages, and in our public one, it's pretty sparse. I can show it, but for me, I have the whole process of converting a temporary note into a permanent note in a similar way to how anything else works in GTD, where basically like as I'm taking meeting notes, as I'm reading something, you know, I'm sort of doing a progressive summarization type thing where, you know, I'll share my screen real quick and actually just show how that workflow had happened. If you look back over a few days, this is actually a good example of how I've done the Zettelkasten stuff. So I was reading a couple. Progressive summarization type thing where I pasted in the content of these articles, and I just, you know, tagged them with, I pasted them one level nested so I could put this sort of metadata tag to collect all the quotes in here under, like, you know, these are quotes about research from Nadia Egbal. So this is sort of one of the patterns that is pretty useful for folks in Roam, is having any external sources get their own page. And, you know, when you paste the content in, you nest it one level underneath so that you can tag all the stuff that like is in the body of that text with the same thing. And so as I was going through, then I like took my particular note on, you know, on this. So if I click this thing right here, like if I go back and I'm reading the independent researcher, right, I can see that there's this one footnote here. Clicking that opens it over here, and I can sort of see that I was taking notes on this on December 9th, and I've got, you know, these other things that it relates to, but I haven't disrupted the flow of that text. I've sort of like maintained that text like the way that it was brought in for me. But let's just, you know, go back to December 9th. And this wasn't a place where I did any permanent notes stuff, but these quotes generated a couple things that I wanted to put in my slipbox, which is this idea that like technical people are just people who try to understand, and questions are a sign that you're paying attention. And so, you know, I'm going to open questions are a sign that you're paying attention. If I like visit this idea in my permanent notes, I've sort of got the source, right? I've got the thing which is which was an idea here. And I've like, nested this under my interpersonal category inside my Slipbox. So this is kind of like the place where these permanent notes are happening. And, inside here, I also just said that, where it came from. And I've got a link to the particular idea of like questions aren't a sign of ignorance, they're a sign you're paying attention, right? And technical people are just people who try to understand. So, and then I've got the other ideas that it relates to, which are a bunch of ideas from my own writing where, doing science is this concept. So does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I think there's actually something more fundamental. As I'm seeing this tool, in some ways, this is exactly what I'm always talking about. I mean, you're doing progressive summarization right there. But I think I have and Glenn had a good question here, which is, why is this disagreement important for anyone else besides just a preference for yourself? And that's a fair question. But I think I have a tremendous resistance to specialized tools of all kinds.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that comes from a history of being burned by specialized productivity tools. Every time a tool gets too narrow, it can't, the business model doesn't work. It's too dependent on this one tiny user base. Then it gets acquired with grand promises of we're going to scale it, we're going to grow. Soon thereafter, it gets shut down, it gets acquired, it gets sold. So what's your view on sort of,
we're in violent agreement on this, actually. Like this point, so like it was an interesting thing because, for the first few years, everyone was like, you need to hire a designer, right? And every designer that I talked to was trying to narrow the use case down. So we had people who were like, man, like I just have this problem of like organizing things for my Zettelkasten. I need to be able to do progressive summarization and put things into a Slipbox. Rome should be like specifically for that. Or someone was like, like Rome's like just a tool for argument mapping. It should be specifically for that. Or like, like people are using it as a personal CRM. Like you should like lean into that use case and like make it a personal CRM and like really like emphasize the personal CRM nature of it. Or like, Rome's for like task management where a task can be in different buckets. Like you should just like lean in and make it for that. And for me, I think, like I said, the Slipbox pattern is a pattern, right? And then, we don't have any specific UI for doing the pattern. Like we have highlighting and we have bolding, which is useful for progressive summarization, but it's not a progressive summarization tool, right? It's like, it's a tool for, like I write my emails in Rome, especially like important emails that I'm going to like send a bunch of that are pretty similar, right? I like make my slide deck presentations for investors or for customers in Rome. Like I generally believe that you want to build a tool that takes underlying steps, right? Like the really like fundamental like abstractions that apply over a large domain of problems. And you use those as building blocks for people to build their own workflows out of. So like people use Rome for spaced repetition. They use our scheduling system, and they use the fact that like you can expand and collapse bullets to use it as basically a flashcard system that they're scheduling certain things in advance. But Rome's not a spaced repetition tool. It's not Anki, right? It's like, it's a general purpose knowledge management system, which does put us in a huge category where there's plenty of other options, but none of those other options are designed around the same sort of fundamental building blocks we have, which is that you can embed a bullet point in many different places. You can link to a particular bullet point. You can, and any tags that you're, 90% of my pages in Rome don't have any content in them. They're just collections of backlinks so that I can find, so that I can filter down based on intersection and see, what are all the tweets that are going to relate to the Tiago debate, or what are the things that relate to the maker schedule that relate to the debate. And yeah, I definitely agree with you on not having a hyper specialized tool.
But then, so let's say hypothetically over the next 5 years, are you okay? Like, what's your model? Are you trying to build the next Google Docs that like everyone uses and it's so universal no one even knows what they're using? Or would you be okay if Rome remains sort of the nerd, like the tool for nerds?
I mean, I don't think you should use Google Docs as example. I think you should use Excel, right? So plenty of people use Excel and they just use it for a very basic use case, right? People organize their like to-do lists in Excel, right? Or they like use it for, these small purpose things. But then there are entire companies that are run on Excel, right? There are like these Excel, databases that are 20 years old that are running like cruise ship containers, and they don't have any special purpose software that they're using. They just have a bunch of Excel models that they're using to run their business on a basis. And so I think we sort of lean into this like Alan Kay example of a good piece of technology is going to make the simple things easy and the complex things possible. And so Rome has a ton of power. Like on the back end, we have a whole like a graph database that users can use. They can sort of specially define attributes on things. Those things end up generating charts, and you can generate tables, and you can do queries on like, who are all the people I know who like are interested in this thing and have attended this event, right? Like you can do really, really crazy, powerful things in Roam. But for somebody who just wants to, organize a task list, it works fine for that use case as well. And they don't need to, they can learn the powerful things as those problems, like as they encounter those problems in their life.
So that pathway would be essentially becoming a utility.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a layer on, this is a, like everyone needs a digital, like we end our systems for getting your knowledge out of your head and into a data structure that you can do things with on a machine are really, really limited right now. Like you have a bunch of things like Excel that let you represent numerical information, but there just isn't, like, our thoughts are in many ways a graph, and they are in many ways like overlapping taxonomies where I can say, like, show me all of my like book recommendations from the last year from people on my close friends list, right? And there just aren't really like generic like Excel level tools that let you do those kinds of operations with your thoughts. And so, yeah, like we want to be a basic utility that like millions of people are able to use successfully.
It's very interesting because there's something I think potentially happening too, which is, that phrase about commoditizing your compliments.
Yeah. Well, like go into it more. I'll make a note on this.
I'm not really gonna get into it, but it's basically this idea that the products that complement your product, you want to be universal, cheap,
yep,
very standardized, commodified, universal, but you want your thing to be
sort
special.
of like a wordly mapping type thing.
Probably, yeah, definitely related to that. I can't say I'm an expert in it, but there's something I see where with building a second brain, I have a methodology. I'm trying to commoditize all the tools. I'm working really hard to just say the tool doesn't matter, but encountering a lot of resistance.
I think the tool, yeah, that's where I'm saying, like, I think that's actually our biggest thing, is that your whole workflow is actually based on some implicit assumptions in the tools that you're building. And it happens to be that all the tools that you are using, that you're comparing, are commodities. They are all hierarchically organized. They are all like basically every single note-taking system that most people have ever seen before Roam is based on this file cabinet approach to knowledge management, where you have to choose what file the thing is going to live in. And that, I think you are right. Every tool you does work that way. Roam does change the category substantially. And I do hope that all the other ones follow suit. I do hope that backlinks become a like common practice that Evernote incorporates. I do hope that, like, these like overlapping like taxonomies do become a thing that happen in Notion databases. It's just not true today, right? It's just true that the reason Roam needs to exist is because none of those other tools actually map to some of these fundamental operations in human thought. And like the field is stuck in a paradigm that like is entirely based on these analog metaphors of files and folders.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because that's exactly it. You're arguing that maybe the tool doesn't always.
You were right 2 years ago, right? You were completely right that the tool doesn't matter 2 years ago. You were completely right 6 months ago that the tool doesn't matter. The thing is that now the tool matters because now there's a better tool, right? So the other ones are, like, it is true that building a second brain in Notion is the same as building a second brain in Evernote. It's just not true that building a second brain in Roam is the same as those two, because it's a fundamentally different set of behavior patterns.
It's a hard, every startup founder says that their product has caused a paradigm shift. What's like your strongest, like, how do we know that's true?
Like our users say that. I'm not the only one who says that. Venkatesh Rao says that, and he's a skeptic, right? He like literally used the term paradigm shift in his tweet storm. Right? He said, like, he said that, and plenty of people who've used our tool have said that, right? So, like, it's a Black Swan thing, right? All swans are white until you see the one that's black, and you just that's just how it is.
Hang on. So how do you tell a Black Swan from just really enthusiastic early users?
I think you can look at people who are not productivity tool junkies, who don't switch from like productivity tool to productivity tool. Look at people who actually do things in the world and don't have time to be spending time sampling every knowledge management tool. And if you look at the people who use Roam, they're not productivity tool junkies, right? Like the people who we're getting these endorsements from are not people who like spend their time thinking about knowledge management, but they are saying that this is like, Evernote didn't work for me, Notion didn't work for me, Roam works for me, Roam fits my brain. And that's why I also think we're going to be like expanding to a much larger market than Evernote ever met, because Evernote, like the reason people I think pay so much money to do your software is because they can't figure out how to make their brain work on Evernote, right? They're stressed about the tool that they're using, and they have some implicit assumption of like, oh, I like must be using this wrong because it works for other people and it doesn't work for me. I need to like go. And I do think that, and we can go into Engelbart's whole stuff. Like, I do think that the ways you augment the intellect aren't just artifacts, they're also methods and language. And I do think that you have a lot of good methods and you have a lot of good language. But I think that like, the tools that you're guiding people towards are like fundamentally poorly suited to the problem domain. And just because they're the popular tools today does not mean that that's where people should be investing their resources, is doing backflips to try to make their brain fit into a hierarchical classification system that doesn't match how ideas work.
What if we did a Roam like themed cohort of the course?
I'm 100% into that.
That would be interesting. Really
Like,
interesting.
I think you could take a bunch of like certain things would be, yeah, like I think your intermediate to packets thing is like already, oh, we got a lot of +1s. Ha, yes, +1, +2. Oh, all right, a Roam cohort would be fantastic. Okay, but yeah, I do think that like the underlying principles that you're articulating do fit well into Roam. I just think they don't fit into the tools you're telling people to use.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting because, I mean, I can't believe we're out of time. We have 4 minutes left, but yeah, I mean, what I'm finding in this quest to just say all tools are the same is people are incredibly attached to their tools. I had this thought last night that software in the future, I think software will be like religions.
Yeah.
Software will be so pervasive in our life and have such an impact on the way we think that they'll be switching from one I already see this, switching from one software to another will be like conversion.
So I think that part of this is actually, so this is another place where Roam takes a pretty different stance from a lot of these other tools. Like if you export your Evernote, you've got to export it in this crazy XML system that is like not particularly well structured. Same is true with Notion. Like you're getting, the export data that you get is like pretty bad. And I think a lot of these companies have done it because they've thought this is the way that we can, lock in our market, right? It's like we build a tool. Once people start using it, they're really locked in. It's really hard for them to port their information over. It's really hard for them they can't really use another tool in combination with our tool because, then their knowledge is dispersed across a bunch of places. And so this is like, and for me, this is just fundamentally like not user aligned. It's like not like, it's not serving a public good. So we're pretty hard on, and we'll be releasing a JSON export soon, but we already have export to plain text. And so we take a pretty hard stance on people are going to use Roam because it's the best tool. And I'm really interested in people, like being able to build other tools off of this data structure that we're presenting that people haven't seen before, so that you can get your stuff out in Markdown, but you can also get the underlying graph database of how your notes are related when you've been using these, the structured relationships that are available in Roam. So you can like use somebody else's tool and like have import for that. So we haven't built an API yet, but that's like one of the, after we build offline and at the same time that we're going to be working on like the mobile apps, we're going to be working on an API, because I think part of the conversion is that, the switching costs are huge today. And so we have to put a bunch of engineering work into building an Evernote importer, and we have to build a bunch of engineering work into building a Notion importer to like help people make those transitions, because those are two of the features that are like most commonly requested.
Yeah.
But like, but people should not have to build a ton of work to build a Roam importer, because your data should be yours and you should be free to take it to whatever little like, new cult that pops up. Like we're a fan of these like emergent religions, and we want to do the Roam thing of incorporating Christianity into the empire when Christianity emerges, right?
Oh, that's funny.
So
That's
like,
funny.
yeah, like Rome as a historical thing, like they would pull in all the local gods, right? Like, you've got some other local god, like, that god's now, and Catholicism still, this is where I get controversial, right? Like Catholicism still sort of does that, where like the local gods become just, manifested as saints.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's how we want to build too. If people have a very specialized tool, they should be able to use it with their Roam data. They should be able to export the thing from that, particular like biometric tracking data. They should be able to pull that into Rome from a specialized application, like the, whatever food journal diary app they're using. They should be able to pull that data in and then see emergent patterns that come from their usage.
Amazing. Conor, this passed very fast, pretty fascinating. We'll have to do a part 2. But
I'm super interested in this idea of a Rome cohort. That definitely sounds, fun.
Yeah, let's talk. I'll need some help. I'll need some support, but that could be interesting.
Yeah.
Where can people find you if you want to be found, or where you want to be found?
So I'm at CONAW, which is just the Boston pronunciation of my name. I'm from Boston, so Kana is how people referred to me growing up. So CONAW is my handle on Twitter, and at Rome. So Rome is not spelled like it's spelled like the action of like wandering, because we want to help you build trails through your knowledge and through other people's knowledge. So roaming is the action. So at Rome Research is us on Twitter, and then we're just romeresearch.com.
Okay, thank you everyone so much for being here. This was fascinating, and please give Rome a try. I personally rely on my third brain, which is all you guys, to try out new apps. Otherwise, I would spend all my time trying out new apps. So those of you, especially those of you familiar with some of my ideas, I'd love to hear how you are building your second brain in Rome, if you decide to do that. And yeah, thanks, Conor. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Take care. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.